I remember, without me being there.
Secrets are never truly buried. They wait.
My boyfriend forgets he loves me before sunrise. Welcome back to episode 2. If you haven't seen episode 1 yet, I'd go watch that first. This part won't hit the same without knowing how we got here. Let's begin the story. I started leaving letters after the journal. Not because I understood yet what any of it meant, but because I needed him to have something steadier than my voice shaking through the same explanation every morning. So I wrote it down instead. Small notes at first, tucked into places he'd find them without me having to watch his face fall while he read them. Good morning. If you're reading this, it means you've forgotten me again. That's okay. We can fall in love one more time. I taped that one to the bathroom mirror. The next one went into his coat pocket. Another into the notebook itself, folded into the page with his coffee order, like a secret hiding inside a smaller secret. At first, he thought it was a joke. A strange one, but a joke. The kind of thing a bored boyfriend might do to be cute, except he had no memory of having a boyfriend at all, so even that explanation didn't quite hold together in his head. I watched him turn one of the letters over in his hands, checking the back like there might be a signature revealing the prank, some logical explanation waiting just out of view. There wasn't. There was only more evidence, the longer he looked. His phone wallpaper was a photo of the two of us, laughing on a rooftop I don't think he recognized anymore. His emergency contact, the one you never think to check until you need it, was my name, saved under a heart emoji he had no memory of adding. The closet held 2 sets of clothes pressed together on the same rod, his and mine, hangers slightly overlapping like they'd been chosen to share space rather than simply stored there. And the photographs, hundreds of them, scattered through drawers and frames and a shoebox. He found himself going through it alone one afternoon while I stood in the doorway, not sure whether to intervene or let him find his own way into the truth. Trips he had no memory of taking. A version of himself laughing in ways his current guarded face didn't seem to know how to do anymore, at least not yet, not that early in a cycle. I remember the exact moment his expression changed from confusion into something closer to fear. He was holding a photo of us at a beach at sunset, his arm around my shoulders, both of us sunburned and grinning like idiots. Noel. His voice was quieter than I'd heard it in a while. Why don't I remember any of this? I sat down across from him, told him the truth, as much of it as I had at the time. That something was happening to him, something I didn't fully understand yet myself, but that it took him from me every single sunrise, cleanly, completely, like erasing chalk off a board. He didn't call it impossible. I think some part of him, underneath the parts that kept forgetting, already suspected something like this was true. He asked question after question that afternoon. How long? How often? Whether doctors had found anything. Whether I'd ever considered that maybe he simply didn't want this life anymore and his mind was finding an excuse to leave it. That last question hurt more than I let him see. I told him no, absolutely not, and reminded him, gently, because he deserved gentleness even in his confusion, that every single reset, he fell for me again anyway. That his mind may have been forgetting me, but something else in him clearly hadn't. He wanted proof. I think, more than anything. That was the turning point. Not the letters, not the photographs, but him actively wanting to understand instead of simply accepting an explanation from someone else. He started going through his own studio that same evening, searching for anything that might explain what I couldn't. That's when he found the journal himself. The same one I'd already read weeks earlier, sitting exactly where I'd left it, like it had been waiting patiently for him to be ready. He read the entry about the accident, about the old man who vanished before help arrived, about the single underlined line. He said it wasn't over, in handwriting that was undeniably his own, describing events he had no memory of ever writing about. I watched him go pale in a way I'd never seen from him before, not even during the worst of the resets. I remember writing this, he said slowly, like the words surprised him as they left his mouth. I don't remember the accident, but I remember writing this entry. Why would I remember writing about something I can't remember happening? I didn't have an answer for him yet, but I finally had the beginning of one, and for the first time since all of this started, it felt less like something being taken from us, and more like something we might actually be able to face together if we could just figure out what it was. We didn't sleep much that week. Caelis became obsessed, in the quiet, methodical way I imagine he approached every building he'd ever designed, laying foundation before anything else, refusing to build on uncertainty. He tracked down anyone who might have known him before the accident, an old co-worker from his first internship, who vaguely remembered him mentioning a strange incident on the highway once, years ago, in passing, the way you'd mention almost anything forgettable. A hospital record from that same year, listing an unidentified elderly patient who was treated briefly before discharging himself against every recommendation, no forwarding address, no follow-up contact ever established. Every piece confirmed what the journal already suggested, without explaining any of the how or why. The answer, when it finally came, didn't come from research at all. It came directly. I was the one who saw him first, actually. I'd gone into the studio late one night to bring Caelis tea, the kind of small, ordinary task that had become its own quiet ritual between us regardless of which version of him I happened to be living with that day. And there, sitting across the desk from Caelis in a locked room neither of us had heard open, was an old man with silver hair and eyes that looked like they'd been watching the world for far longer than any single lifetime should allow. Caelis wasn't afraid. I think some part of him had been expecting this moment since he'd first read his own handwriting describing it. The old man introduced himself the way you'd introduce an old debt rather than a person, not unkindly, just plainly, the way you state something that's simply, undeniably true. He confirmed everything the journal implied. The accident, the rescue, the refusal of any reward, which he called, gently, the most dangerous kindness a person could offer someone like him. There is a curse in your bloodline, he said, echoing words Caelis had apparently already heard once before, years ago, and dismissed as easily as he dismissed most things that asked him to believe in something beyond blueprints and structural integrity. It doesn't destroy at random. It feeds on the strongest love in a person's heart, and it does not act until that love is strong enough to be worth taking. I asked him, carefully, why it was taking Caelis's memory of me specifically, rather than simply taking Caelis's life, or mine, or anything else that might satisfy whatever hunger a curse like this apparently had. The old man looked at me for a long moment before answering, like he was deciding how much of the truth I could carry. Because I intervened, he said. The curse could not take his life. I saw to that much, in exchange for a kindness I never properly repaid. So it took the next most precious thing instead. Every sunrise, it erases the person he loves most, because the alternative was far worse, and I could not allow that debt to go unpaid in full. I don't know how to describe what it felt like, hearing that the very thing protecting Caelis's life was also the thing destroying mine, one morning at a time. Grateful and furious in the same breath. Relieved he was alive to forget me at all, and devastated that his survival apparently required my erasure as payment. Can it be broken? Caelis asked. His voice was steady, but I'd learned by then what steady looked like when it was covering something enormous underneath. The old man's expression didn't change, but something in the room did, a stillness that felt like the air itself was bracing for what came next. It can, he said, but the price is not memory. The curse has already shown you it can take memory and give it back, cycle after cycle, endlessly, without ever truly setting either of you free. To break it fully requires something far more permanent. What? You would have to give up the feeling itself, not the memories of loving him. The capacity to love him at all, ever again, for the rest of your life. The curse does not simply want to erase what you remember. It wants to erase what you're capable of feeling. Break it, and you keep every memory you've ever made together. You will simply never be able to feel any of it the way you once did. I remember looking at Caelis in that moment, waiting for him to say something, anything, and finding that I couldn't read his expression at all. For the first time since this entire nightmare began, I had absolutely no idea what he was thinking. We didn't talk about it again for 3 days. I don't think either of us knew how to start that conversation without it becoming the only conversation we ever had again. So we did ordinary things instead. Made dinner. Watched something neither of us paid attention to. Fell asleep with the lights still on. Like leaving them off felt like agreeing to something neither of us was ready to agree to yet. He asked me, on the third night, whether I wanted him to break it. I told him the truth, which was that I didn't know how to answer that question honestly without sounding like I was choosing my own comfort over his. Some nights, watching him forget me was the loneliest thing I'd ever experienced. worse than actual loneliness, because it came with the specific cruelty of being witnessed by someone who used to know me completely. Other nights, watching him fall in love with me all over again felt like being given something most people never get once in an entire lifetime. The chance to be chosen, freely, without history, without obligation, purely because something in him kept finding its way back to me regardless of what he'd lost. If you break it, I said finally, you get to keep every single day we've had. Every year, every argument, every ridiculous flower you didn't know why you were buying me. You just won't feel any of it the way you used to. You'll know it happened. You won't feel it happened. And if I don't break it, then I keep losing you, every morning, for as long as we both live. And you keep finding your way back to me anyway, every single time, which is either the most romantic thing I've ever witnessed or the cruelest, depending on the day you ask me. He was quiet for a long time after that. When he finally spoke, his voice had a rawness I'd rarely heard from him, not even during our worst arguments in the years before any of this began. I don't want to keep doing this to you, he said. Watching you exhaust yourself convincing a stranger to love you, every single day, for the rest of your life. I don't think I could survive knowing that's what our life together actually is, even if I don't remember most of the days where it happens. But if you break it, you'll never feel this again. Any of it. Not the good parts, not the bad parts. Just nothing, where all of this used to be. I know. His eyes were wet, though he wasn't quite crying yet. But at least the nothing would be honest. At least you wouldn't have to keep rebuilding something from scratch every single sunrise, wondering if this is the day I finally don't come back to you at all. I understood, in that moment, that he'd already decided. Not because he wanted to stop loving me. Because he couldn't stand the thought of what loving him was costing me, cycle after cycle, with no end in sight except an eternity of the same devastating routine. I asked him for one more day before he told the old man his decision. Not because I thought a single day would change anything. Because I wanted one more morning where he woke up and, eventually, chose me all over again, the way he always did, before that choice became permanent in a way that would only ever point in one direction from then on. He gave me that morning. It was, without question, one of the best days we ever had together, precisely because we both knew exactly what it was costing us to have it. The old man returned 2 nights later, standing in the studio doorway like he'd simply been waiting nearby the entire time, patient in the specific way only very old, very inevitable things can afford to be patient. Caelis told him his decision without hesitation, though I could see what the steadiness cost him. He wanted to break the curse. He wanted me free of a life spent rebuilding love from nothing, every single day, indefinitely. I stood beside him while it happened, because he asked me to, and because I couldn't have made myself leave the room even if he hadn't. I don't know how to describe what breaking a curse actually looks like. There wasn't lightning, or wind, or anything dramatic enough to match how enormous the moment felt from the inside. There was only Caelis, standing very still, eyes closed, while something behind his expression seemed to loosen and settle all at once, like a held breath finally released after months of holding it without realizing. When he opened his eyes, I knew immediately that something fundamental had changed, though it took him a moment longer to find the words for it. I remember, he said quietly. All of it. The cafe, the flower, the sketchbook, every single sunrise you've had to survive without me actually being there with you. I felt something in my chest loosen too, hearing that. 3 years of memories, finally whole again, finally his, permanently. Then he looked at me, and I watched his face search for something that clearly wasn't arriving the way he expected it to. I know you're important to me, he said, and his voice had gone very quiet, very careful, like he was handling something fragile enough to shatter if he wasn't gentle enough. I remember loving you. I remember exactly how it felt, every single moment of it. But I can't feel it anymore. Not the way I used to. I'm looking at you, and I know I should feel everything I used to feel, and there's just nothing there. An enormous, empty nothing, where all of that used to live. I'd prepared myself for grief. I'd prepared myself for another forgotten morning, another stranger's face across the breakfast table. I hadn't prepared myself for this. A Caelis who remembered everything and felt none of it, looking at me with the specific devastation of someone mourning a version of himself he could no longer access. I smiled at him anyway, through tears I didn't bother hiding. That's okay, I told him, and somehow, Impossibly, I meant it. You gave me back every memory we ever made. That's more than most people ever get to keep. I think that has to be enough. It wasn't enough. Not really. But it was what we had, and I'd learned, over months of forgotten mornings, that sometimes the only thing left to do with an impossible loss is decide to carry it with grace instead of bitterness. I let him go that night. Not because I stopped loving him. Because loving him meant accepting that the version of him capable of loving me back in return no longer existed, and holding on to someone who could never again meet me there felt like its own quiet cruelty, one neither of us deserved to carry any longer than we already had. Months passed before I saw him again. I'd like to tell you I spent that time healing in some clean, linear way, but grief doesn't move like that, not really. Some days I missed him so much I couldn't get out of bed. Other days, I felt something closer to relief, strange as that sounds, simply from no longer waking up every morning wondering which version of him I'd have to reintroduce myself to. I kept drawing. I kept believing, somehow, despite everything, that people deserve to be truly seen. I just stopped expecting that belief to cost me quite so much. It was a bookstore, of all places, where I saw him again. I was reaching for a novel on a low shelf when another hand reached for the same book, and I looked up to find Caelis, looking exactly like himself, and also nothing like the man I used to know all at once. He apologized, the way you apologize to any stranger you've accidentally reached toward at the same moment. Then he smiled, easy and unguarded in a way I hadn't seen from him even in our best years together. "You have good taste," he said. "So do you." I told him, and something in my chest ached and settled at the exact same time. We ended up talking the entire afternoon. About books, about his work, a new project he was excited about in a way that felt lighter than anything I remembered from before. About nothing important at all, the way you talk to someone you're genuinely curious about, rather than someone you're desperately trying to hold on to. There was no curse between us anymore. No forced memories waiting to be reset by sunrise. No fate steering either of us toward each other against our will. Just two people, meeting, entirely by choice, for the first time in a way that had nothing to do with anything either of us had lost. As we left the bookstore together that evening, he reached for my hand crossing the street, the same instinctive gesture his body used to make back when his mind couldn't remember why. He paused, seeming almost surprised at himself. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Sure. Would you like to go on a second date?" I laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from somewhere much deeper than simple amusement. I said yes. Not because fate demanded it, or because a curse had steered us back toward each other. Because he asked, freely, as himself, and because some part of me had never really stopped hoping love could bloom again between us, not through memory, not through magic, but simply through who we both still were, underneath everything we'd survived. That's the story of how my boyfriend forgot he loved me, every single sunrise, for almost a year of my life. And it's also the story of how, months later, without any curse left to blame or credit, he chose to fall in love with me all over again anyway. I don't know if that makes it a happy ending. I only know it's the truest one we ever could have gotten. If you've made it this far, thank you for staying with Noel and Caelis through everything it took to get here. This story has ended, but Nightfall Studio isn't finished. New series are already on the way. Make sure you're subscribed and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next.